No, looks like the number's pretty stable. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about fun with physics, takes from the end of the universe. No, I'm just kidding. We're not doing a physics program. We are doing genealogy, papers from the attic. Learn how to preserve old documents and photographs. So thank you for joining us. I don't know if any of you have attended other genealogy virtual Zoom programs with us before. Welcome if you're coming back. Again, I'll reiterate that we cannot hear you, and the video is not operational, so we can't see you either. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. And if something having a connection issue or something, or I kind of give a pixelated voice sound or something doesn't make sense, please drop it in the chat, and we'll pick that up and I can reiterate. My name is Trey. I'm a librarian here with the Genealogy Center. So I welcome y'all. And joining me as the chat moderator is Nathan. Say hi, Nathan.
Hello, how's it going, everybody?
So Nathan will be being my extra set of eyes on the chat this evening. So welcome, everybody. And if I can get this, there we go. So why save your papers and why get them from the attic? Well, you might want to add to your family archives. You kind of need to take a survey and see what you have, what has been stored away for years and years and years that you may or may not know about. You may want to dig around and find information to tell a story of your family. You may just want to collect the information that you have, assess what you have in the hopes that future family generations will be able to access those records. It's also not just a story of your family, it's also a story of the community in which you've lived in or your family has lived in. Sometimes those family treasures become community treasures and tell something about the formative years of a community. And it might offer some proof of an event or an explanation for why an event happened, or more detailed, primary resource of something in the past. So what you might find as you're, I won't say digging through your attic, but you may find sentimental treasures, a lot of ephemera from the past, from families past, or your past. You may find historical documents of interest. You may find long forgotten, long lost legal and financial documents that you kind of wish you had maybe a few years ago when you were looking for them originally. Fun stuff like that. You may find proof of events. Again, it becomes community history as well. You may find the photographs, and I'll also add negatives, perhaps, clothing, toys, and just other goodies. We're not going to be really talking about the clothing, toys, and the other goodies. We're primarily talking about the paper ephemera, journals, photographs, even negatives, letters, scrapbooks, and the like. That's primarily what we're talking about. So something to keep in mind as you're going through and you're cleaning out storage boxes and storage files and cabinets or drawers or cedar chests, what have you, is keep in mind this little acronym, the IDOM. Identify, you got to find them, you got to locate them first, right? And just like a professional archivist, you got to decide what's important to keep, what tells the story of the time best. Now, there are some things that you can't really escape from. You'll have something that you'll find that has sentimental value, and that's okay. But decide what is important to you to keep, what's important to your family, and you organize it. So sort it by type, by format, if you will. So whether it's here are photographs, here are documents, here's books, here's scrapbooks, what have you, negatives. sort them by type. And this is really the organizing part here, is in looking towards if you want to do a project to digitize any of these materials. That's kind of what this is really looking towards, to help kind of get you thinking of some steps looking towards digitization. So sorting it by the who, what, where, when, year, if known, location, all that kind of fun stuff. And then of course, make copies. That's what you're looking at. So you can either store them to DVD, kind of a working copy that you can share. That's probably less of a thing now, as new computers don't come with built-in drives. So you may really be looking at a USB storage device, flash drives, which also are not the greatest long-term storage, but it's something easy to share. Of course, you can use cloud storage with a paid service, or you can use external hard drive, and then share extra copies. Give an extra hard drive to another family member or friend to keep it safe. So remember to identify, decide, organize, and make copies. But for goodness sake, stop. Get them out of the attic and the garage. I know growing up, a lot of the family's history and a lot of the family's past was always stored in the attic. I'm a Texas transplant, so perhaps our attics were a little cooler back in the day, where I was from. And I know things that survived largely unscathed for decades and decades, but just a few things put for one season in a Texas attic, you might end up with the very warped and melted pile of just gross. And same kind of goes for the garages too. You just, please, not a good place to store your important, cherished papers, letters, and ephemera like that. The garage and the attic are two of the worst places to store stuff. So you're looking to preserve your family archives, if you'd like to call it that. Really controlling your storage environment is, as the quote here says, it's the most important thing you can do to preserve your collections. You may start out with a jumble such as this, as the photo example. You've got every manner of folders and papers and just stuff just crammed everywhere. Yeah, that may be something that might survive for a while, but if you are accessing that to do family research and stuff, that ungemming and regemming things in the overstuffed bookcases can cause damage. It's not great for long-term viability of the items, but doesn't it look so much better when you have it nice, neat, and organized? Maybe this is a little over the top for most people, but it just looks nicer, and you can find your materials. So you may start with the other. You may go to something a little more organized. It's always helpful. That's something you can control pretty easily. So how do you preserve your archive? Well, control of temperature is really important. Control of the humidity, the light, the dirt and dust. Those are fairly easily controllable things. And in fact, the materials largely like a temperature environment that we find comfortable. Not going to either extreme of too cold or too warm. If you use the right kind of enclosures, the right type of containers, file boxes or file cabinets or things, folders, that sort of stuff, that's important to stabilize the materials you're looking to keep. And just be mindful that and careful when you're actually having to pull out the originals. The more you handle them, the more you unfold those letters and things like that, the more chances you have of creating more damage to potentially fragile items. So you probably want to really make copies for referencing for research instead of your originals. And this illustration here comes from the Texas Archive of the Moving Image. While they're showing you do's and don'ts of storing your films and video at home, it has a lot of good information that's kind of the same environments that you would your paper or your photographs, your printed photographs. You don't want to put them in the attic. You don't want to put them in the garage. You don't want to put them under a kitchen sink on top of a hot television. Although nowadays you probably, as this example, that's a console TV. I don't know the last time I've seen a working console TV. Probably don't want to put them in dead space in a basement or next to the washer and dryer, as we know sometimes those are incredibly dusty environments, or have a potential for leaking water and thus damaging your precious family papers, photographs, and the like. The storage conditions, as I had mentioned, a lot of times the what makes a good storage environment is kind of what we find comfortable. Really, heat accelerates the deterioration, but also low temperature increases the chances of condensation, so you have some moisture damage potential. High humidity, that is more than 65 degrees, sorry, not degrees, 65%, provides moisture that can lead to softening or swelling of materials, especially like photographic emulsions. And it also creates an environment for mold to grow. And mold is naturally occurring in the environment. We have mold spores you can track in on stuck to you, your clothing, items. You never know when you might pick that up. But too low a humidity, as we sometimes know, if we're running the heater in the winters, like we just recently had a very cold snap, it leads to drying out. We have really low humidity. You might have noticed that increase in static electricity. So dust particles and pieces of grit just stick to everything. And sometimes that static electricity can damage your magnetic media. So your old VHS tapes, your beta tapes, cassette tapes, or reel-to-reel if you happen to have even older storage material. Might present a problem with damaging the recorded material. Ideal environment, basically about a constant 70 degrees, although I couldn't find exactly where I had seen it, but typically a range of about 65 to about 74 is about the industry museum standard. If I remember correctly, I was trying to find that exact range, but I think that's about right, about 65 to about 74 degrees Fahrenheit was a good range. And who wouldn't want a constant year-round 70 degrees, right? That'd be nice. Humidity, basically about 30 to 50% is a good average. And your storage conditions are important. Light, the ultraviolet light, the UV light, that can break down paper. It can bleach out. You ever left anything, a book jacket or a photograph in direct sunlight that gets direct sunlight every day for a portion of the day for years and years, you'll notice that photo or that book jacket's kind of faded out and starts to lose some of its color, this robust color. That's because the dyes start to fade. And that damage is cumulative. There's no way to reverse that. And sunlight, and unfortunately fluorescent light is some of the most damaging. Incandescent's better, and not that probably now as incandescent's not as widespread as it once was, because those can raise room temperature. Those incandescent bulbs can get warm. I think a lot of people, I don't recall the last time I seen an incandescent bulb, but like Lowe's or a Home Depot. But the LED lights are far better. They're not 100% without UV light emission, but their percentage is really low. It's a lot lower than the incandescent or the fluorescent lighting. So it's better. Believe it or not, you might be saving some of your materials just by simply using the LED lights. The dust and dirt can become embedded into the textiles. It can be embedded in the paper fibers. And you can accidentally, if you're stacking those on top of one another, sliding them around on a table in stacks, you can scratch things. And sometimes those particles of the grit and grime could be acidic. And combine that with some of the moisture in the air, they may start providing some deterioration medium to start working to decay whatever it is you're trying to keep for long term. As well as that can also attract different types of molds and insects, all of which are bad. I'm not here to give a lesson on cleanliness of house, but regular housekeeping. That's a really good way of controlling the environment. And as this image shows, get it out of the attic. Not a great place. Use change frequently and use good air filters, window screens, and of course, if you're using have the original materials on display somewhere, use low wattage bulbs with dimmers. And like I said, that's probably really referring to the incandescent bulbs. LEDs are much better nowadays. But it's still good to rotate the displays, not leave the same item up for 5, 10, 15 years at a time. Let it have some rest from the light. Or better yet, just display copies and store the originals. Make copies to put on display, and you can keep those out. Especially if you digitize it, you can reprint as many times as you need from a good archival copy, digitized copy, and keep it on display and keep the originals safe. And again, I can't reiterate enough, avoid basements. Not that we have that many basements here. Avoid basements, definitely attics and garages with the Texas heat and extreme cold. And kind of like that little chart that we showed earlier, the house, if you kind of collect your items, it's really better to kind of keep it towards the center of the house where the temperature and the humidity is fairly consistent. It's fairly stable. And it goes without saying, good non-leaky windows, no cracks and crevices around your doors and windows is always helpful if you're got materials stored in that room. Keeping the lights off when you're not using them. And basically just having a good HVAC system and good repair to control your temperature and humidity. And once again, kind of reiterating the keep it away from direct natural light, direct sunlight, and be careful in limiting handling. So some of this is redundant. It's just to kind of reinforce those ideas. But keeping the archives dry and a constant temperature is really the key. And another important factor, and we'll talk about a little bit in a moment, is just the proper storing of the materials. So kind of a rule of thumb is storing materials at least 4 inches off the floor, not flush on the floor. So if you have a box of your family's papers and documents, throwing them on the floor of the closet, not the greatest. But if you just had it where you could put it on a shelf that's at least got some 4 inches of clearance from the floor and some clearance in the back against the wall, a few inches, just to give some airflow, air exchange there. Metal shelving is the best, since wood can and does absorb atmospheric humidity. Yeah, so that about covers that. And again, not that I'm telling you how to clean your house. It's just, those are some easy things to control. So what do you want to do with your treasures? What to do with them? Well, a lot of times people like to collect items and make scrapbooks, but please do not use adhesive. Don't use tape to repair items or stick it in a scrapbook. Please, please avoid. And separate items. This might not make quite as much sense, but separate acidic items from newspaper clippings. A lot of times you might run into it. Well, I say a lot of times. I think it's changed in the last few decades. They've gotten better. I remember when I was growing up, we had a couple of things here. These scrapbook pages to stick your photos in that were, I don't know, they had a kind of a built-in adhesive, and it was a clear layer, and you kind of peeled it up and you stuck your photos on that, and then you sealed it over. Those were terrible, terrible for photographic prints. And if after they've been in there for 3 or 4 decades and you've gone to try to pull them out, that self-adhesive backings really adhere to the back of your photograph sometimes. They're very acidic, and it's a mess. And some photos you can lose the photos trying to peel them, separate them from the pages. Some of the earlier scrapbooks from a few decades ago that you might have put in newspaper clippings, some of the had the black clear pages, but it had maybe the black page in there to make something stand out. A lot of times those were made with very low quality paper, almost like construction paper, or almost like a thick newsprint type paper, and those were actually highly acidic. So combine that with a newspaper clipping, which we'll talk about in a little bit, of being acidic itself. Bad mix in for the long-term storage. And also just having the clips and the pins, or I don't know, I've had some old stuff that had staples, old staples, and the older staples from, oh gosh, 30, 40 years ago and earlier were honest to gosh steel staples, not aluminum. And those staples would rust. So if you had high humidity environments, that staple starts rusting, and then that rust starts staining the paper around, and you might have some portions, if it's stapled near text, you may have some portions that are not legible anymore. And if you're looking and viewing your original items, just make sure your hands are clean and the area is clean and uncluttered. That's a good way, best way to avoid damage or mixing that up inadvertently with something else. So before I move on and talk about some of the different individual types of stuff, is there any questions that come to mind at the moment? I don't see the chat number roll over from what it was, so I guess there's no questions.
Yep, no questions have been posted just yet.
Okay,
So
cool.
If anyone has them at any time, feel free to type them in the chat.
Yep. Thank you, sir. So with paper items, what you would really need to do is store the paper items in a lignin-free file folders, and those folders can be placed in a document box, kind of like the examples here. If you have anything oversized, you can still get like legal, but if you have something oversized, approaching 11 by 17 or larger or something than what a typical file folder you can get, you might want to store those in a flat file box, or if you happen to have flat files at home, you can store those flat in that. And before you store them, remove the staples, any paper clips. And same thing, I forgot to mention with the same story about the paper clips, our same story as the staples, the paper clips were made out of steel at one point back in time, and those can rust as well. Less concerned, I know we say here about the strings and any kind of ties. It really depends on how they're tied and strung up. If it's part of the binding, it might be more beneficial if you just not remove them unless you kind of know what you're doing, or if it wasn't original to the thing, where maybe it's just I don't know, I have seen family papers that were kind of like semi rolled up and just tied with a ribbon or just some old twine and string. So everything's like really, really curly. You might want to jettison the string that was put there years and years later, and store those paper items properly in flat, if you can get them flat without causing damage. The file cabinets are, like I said, are good, using the good quality folders. Boxes, using archival boxes in the different sizes, good fitting lids, but especially using the acid-free and the lignin-free is good, and any kind of buffered paper, board, or tissue is good for the paper items. If you have to use, well, not if you have to, there are good products out there that you might prefer to use that are plastic. It's important to use the right type of plastic. So any of the polyester, polyethylene, or polypropylene are good, stable, chemically stable plastics that are good for archiving materials. You may have seen, I don't remember if it's a brand name or a type of plastic. I'm drawing a blank now, but you may have seen Mylar. That's a clear sheet form of polyester plastic. But using folders helps avoid, damaging items if you're removing them from a stack. So having individual pages in folders is a good practice. So periodicals and pamphlets. So magazines and pamphlets can be stored in a folder, in a file cabinet, spine down, because if you put it spine up, all those pages of magazines collected of folded sheets that are typically stapled, right? So over time, the weight of those internal pages, the weight of the paper itself can start pulling that apart. Gravity acts upon that. So you want to put that spine down so it rests on its spine so it doesn't pull itself apart. And you could just store them in flip-top boxes, kind of like we have examples shown here. Now, newspapers, slightly different story. There are some newspaper storage boxes where you can store them flat. Takes up a little bit more space, so larger shelf, wider shelf, depending on the era when the newspaper was printed with what its page size is. But this is a periodical that's typically produced with a type of cheap, inexpensive paper that's made from mostly wood pulp. We know it as newsprint, but part of that milling process that produces newsprint, it does not remove the lignin from the wood pulp. So it's really the acidity of the lignin which turns the newspaper yellow and brittle when it's exposed to air and sunlight. So that yellowed newspaper, that really brown and brittle, that's the UV or air damage to the newsprint. So once a newspaper starts breaking down, has received that damage, you can't reverse that. So you got to be really, excuse me, really careful at storage and handling of the very old newspapers, because of that acidity over time, and you don't know when or how something was stored previously and what kind of damage. But you can store them carefully, and that can help slow down the process, but it doesn't reverse the process.
We have a couple quick questions here. They might be talked about in later slides, but
Okay,
the
sure.
first one was, do you have suggestions for sources for acid-free storage supplies?
Yes. In fact, with our handout link at the end of that handout has a, now we're not endorsing any of those. It's just a collection of different resource companies where you can find archival supplies. But that's at a single page, 2-column single page at the end of the handout.
All right, I posted that in chat there. All right, we have another one. Paula says, I have my dad's photo album from the 1930s. All photos are glued onto black album pages. Any suggestions how to safely remove these photos?
There's not an easy way, and that gets into the realm of the conservation, and it depends. That's a big depends, and that's a conversation topic. I don't have a good clean answer for that. I don't have enough conservation experience to suggest safely one way or the other how to unstick those, quite honestly. So I'm hesitant to offer. I know of a few articles that have talked about it, but none of them I wouldn't suggest to somebody not knowledgeable. That may be something to approach a trained conservator to inquire, just
Would
to be
you
on the
ever,
safe side.
yeah, would you ever think about like just cutting them out of the page and then leave the back attached to the photo? I don't know what you know what the plan is for the photos after they're removed from a page, right? But
yeah, it depends on how well they're centered with the photo on the opposite side of the page, or if they're just stuck to to one side of that that album page.
Yeah.
I've seen it both ways. Honestly, I've stumbled across them in antique stores, and they just use the front page and didn't stick anything to the back, so everything was on the 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 odd numbered pages. So it really depends.
Gotcha.
And like I had mentioned, that black, depending on when that was made and when that was marketed, that may be in itself fairly acidic. I don't know.
Yep. Do you want to take a couple more questions now, or
let me move on to a couple more sections. The next section is the photographs and the negatives. That may answer some others, maybe.
Okay. All right.
So with the photographs and negatives, one of the things you're looking for in the supply, any of the suppliers, is something that shows it's passed the photographic activity test. That you might see it just initialed as the PAT. That's something to look for. As I mentioned, avoid the plastic sleeves if you're storing in high humidity. But if you're got a decent HVAC system and you can maintain your humidity levels within the tolerable range, that's going to be okay. Just remember to use the one of the and I'm drawing a blank on the polyester, polyethylene, or polypropylene type plastics. You need the paper enclosures, and when I say enclosures, it's like those storage boxes that you've seen some of the example photos on some of these slides. Just make sure that they're acid free and that the envelopes or the folders that you're using are archival. And there are standards, and some of the suppliers go to greater pains than the others to what's what I'm looking for, to validate that they're acid free and archival. Just depends on the company. Some are better than others at keeping up with their supply quality. If you're going to put originals and put it into an album, use the mounting corners. The corners have the adhesion on them that shouldn't touch the photos themselves, so you can reverse and you can get your photo out. If you're going to keep an album together and intact, you can store it in a box. And until you know, for that, going back to the question with the album where they're glued in, that might be the best, is until you know more definitively what kind of glue, and talk to a conservator. Maybe you just want to keep it intact and just store it as it is. You might run into, I don't know when it says broken. It didn't mean to say wrap broken glass. You might run in or have some older negatives that are actually on glass plates, glass negatives. You want to wrap those and keep those separate. And some of the suppliers will have a separate product specifically for the glass plate. So it has like a little envelope and goes into a box, and you got some padding between those. But one of the main things for the photos and the negatives that you just avoid the PVC, the polyvinyl chloride album pages. I think I had a bunch of those when I was growing up, and I know they probably still marketed those through the 80s and 90s maybe. And it kind of had that weird smell, that plasticky, almost like a swimming pool float smell. I don't know if that makes sense, but they had a strange smell to them. Now, the photographs and the negatives too, both, they consist of a lot of different layers. So with photograph, you have a support layer, you'll have some binder chemicals and emulsions, and you may have some image dyes. Depending if it's a color photograph, would have the color dyes, and the black and white photographs would have a silver gelatin emulsion on paper. And negatives are kind of the same way. They have many layers of coating chemistry, either on the front and or the back of the film's base material. And the light sensitive emulsion for black and white will have silver. If it's a color negative, it'll have various colored dyes, all of which can be damaged by the temperature and the light and humidity. So books and scrapbooks, those kind of cross over a little bit with the photo albums. Especially the photo albums and books in fragile condition, you want to keep those stored flat in box. Those are really the safest way to contain any pieces that might break off. I know probably for a generation or two, a lot of the albums may have stood on the bookshelf and bookcase on their end as a normal book, but gravity has a pull on everything. So sometimes they start pulling apart from just sitting there in the normal attitude of a book. So yeah, storing flat and boxed is a good way to go with that. And if you have some newspaper clippings mixed in with that, with photos, you may want to interleave some acid-free or buffered paper between those to keep that acid of that one item from migrating and contaminating other adjacent materials or pages. That'll help slow down the deterioration of some items. And if something comes loose, leave it loose. Don't try to reattach it. A lot of times I think people in modern adhesives and stuff may or may not be archival, but it also may adhere stronger. And if you use something that adheres stronger than the original thing, if it's stronger than the surrounding material, you may break it away and cause more damage by making something crumble where it wasn't breaking and crumbling simply because the new product is so much stronger than the original material, if that makes any sense. And best, if you have to handle, and you have to handle it a lot, go ahead and scan or photocopy the pages, or just photograph the pages to give you quick access and reference, so you don't have to keep going to the original over and over and over and over again. Kind of like the magazines, if you can't store them flat and lay them flat, do them spine down, depending on what box size you've got. Just simple things like shelving the small and medium size scrapbooks or books or something together in similar size, just to keep them from warping while they're sitting on the shelf, like I was talking about, sitting normally on a shelf. And if, like I've already mentioned, oh, I'm sitting here on the wrong, my bad. I'm sorry, guys. Y'all didn't see that screen. Where was I? Oh, yes. Any kind of loose bound or damaged books, keeping them boxed, and you can even wrap them loosely in some acid-free tissue just to kind of give them a little extra protection. And there is some acid-free, safe string or twine that you can kind of like bundle it and keep it together, not too tightly because you don't want it to saw into the pages or the cover, but you can loosely tie it to hold it together. And of course, any oversized items lay flat. And yeah, don't roll it, don't fold it. Yeah, and there's a note here too. If you have to roll something, roll it around. Especially this is pertinent to fabrics, textiles, but it also applies to some paper items. If you have to roll it around the outside of a tube. Then you secure it with tissue, and then if you've got one of enough size, you then slide that inside another tube with the end caps, and that'll help protect it. And the roll is not so tight that it might crack or damage the materials. Let's see, the audiovisual media. Not a lot to say about this except handle with care. Any kind of grooved, albums, because yes, you could have a recording of loved ones talking. That back in the once upon a time, I remember you could go get it was almost like a novelty thing at a fair. You could go record your voice and it would do it onto like a little small, like a small 45 size record. Haven't seen those in quite a while. It's kind of dating myself. But any kind of the optical disc, center hole or edges is best. Don't get finger oils across the surface. Because believe it or not, there's a lot of organic material that comprises the construction of a CD or DVD disc, and bugs can get to it, and oils and those kind of things from your fingers and your skin can attract growth of microscopic particles that can start eating that as well. It's fascinating, really. Any kind of open reel or magnetic tape hold by the edges. I don't know how many of us have had old cassette tapes that the tape deck ate and we had to spend a good half an hour rolling that back into the cassette shell. Just, so yeah, don't touch the magnetic tape. Hold your negatives by the edge. Any of the formats of those, store upright, and keep everything clean. And if you have something that's starting to deteriorate, like um, old movies on 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter or Super 8 or anything like that, you might want to talk to a specialist. And there's those companies out there that help transfer those to digitize it. So that would be worth talking with somebody like that and copying it to a newer medium. And just keep multiple copies. So I'm going to pause there. Did that answer some of the questions?
Yeah, possibly. We had a couple more that came in.
Okay.
One was, should we laminate newspaper articles?
Ooh, no. I hate to sound so emphatic, but no, don't. Because, well, a couple of things I put on my archivist hat. That's not reversible. Anything that you want to do, at least from a professional level of archiving, it's got to be reversible. Any kind of things you're doing to conserve an object, it's got to be reversible. And laminating, or the old process, decoupaging it onto a big plaque, you can't reverse that. Reversing it would destroy it. And just because you're trapping it between the layers of the laminated plastic doesn't stop its decay. And in some cases, because you don't really know what that lamination material is made out of, you may hasten that decay. And if you start hastening, if it starts rapidly decaying because it's not reversible, you're stuck with your choice. So no, lamination is never the way to go with a valuable document.
All right. And then there was one more question. Where do you find conservators?
Ooh. As big of an area, metropolitan area as we have, you might find them. I hate to say it, Google, Yellow Pages, virtual Yellow Pages. We do have reference solutions, which you can use to find different types of businesses, and they might be listed there. And you might be able to find some professional agencies, not professional agencies, associations, like archivist groups, or just calling some of the inquiring from some of the museums in the area. They may have contacts that they could share. It really depends on what you're looking to conserve. But I would think our Dallas-Fort Worth area has at least a few of different expertise.
Yeah, I used to work at a museum, and I would second them as a resource. They should have staff who at least have some contacts, or at least some people to point you in the direction that you're going. Just I guess keep in mind the museum that you get into contact with, really, just because if they're an art museum and you want to preserve a newspaper, they might not be that helpful. But
Exactly.
Just look around. They should have some resources to help you out.
Yeah, and some of the universities too, like not that I'm saying they'll help with items, mind you, but University of North Texas has a rare books room. Talking with their staff might be able to point you in the right direction, or know of colleagues who have expertise in, textile conservation or photograph conservation. It just depends. So I don't have a set answer. Here's your great list of stuff. I'm afraid I don't have that.
Yeah, I know that there's many universities who have various archival collections for various reasons: local history, college history, university history, and whatnot. So, to speak from an experience, of, I think it was the University of Houston, had a ton of Houston related history things in their archives. So yeah, they are also a resource.
And University of Texas, any number of locations around the state probably have a lot of expertise and some knowledge as well, as are many others. Okay, cool.
Excellent. Yep, that's all the questions at the moment.
Sorry, that's not a simple answer. Yes, here they are, but yeah, they're out there. I hate to say Google, but yeah, might be a good start to research. So the framing and display options. Oops, I'm in the wrong spot. There we go. So the framing and display options. Let's assume, and I just stuck this in here because you might find something really grand. You may find some old photographs of I don't know, your grandfather sitting there operating a linotype machine, setting lines of type to create a newspaper page or something. You might want to blow that up big, or it might be already a big print that vintage from the day. If you're going to use the original, keep in mind, use good materials. Don't go cheap. Use the good 100% cotton mat and mounting boards. Use the window mat, acid. Make sure they're using acid-free backing boards. Some things like that, and mind the lighting. Interior rooms are more stable temperature-wise. Probably not the best place to put it above the mantle of a fireplace. Just saying. And some other kind of nitpicky things of just, maybe not where it's directly adjacent to one of your exit vents for the heat or air conditioning or radiators, any kind of thing like that. You can always put spacers between the frame and the wall to give a little airspace behind something. But really preferable at all possibility, display a copy, store the original, have a copy made, and then you won't have to really worry about it as much, because then you can always replace it should it become damaged. That's really the simplest, safest thing. Now, this is kind of maybe for some a source of major trepidation, and it scares them, and it's really not. It's come a long way, and it's a lot simpler with a lot of tools. But we're not going to go down in the rabbit hole of a lot of the tools and the processes on this. We actually have another class that talks about this. But what we will talk about is really kind of some basics and why digitize. Like I said, it's really, I can't stress this enough. It's really probably better to display a copy than to display the original. But the digital copies really support the preservation. It's not a preservation in and of itself. So let that sink in for a minute. So creating the digital copy for preservation is not preserving the item. You're making the digital copy so that you have access and can view it repeatedly or handle a print of the copy. That helps preserve the original because you're not handling that as much. Having the digital copies, you can make duplicates on multiple storage devices in the cloud. As I said earlier, we kicked off hard drive, that kind of stuff. Have it stored in multiple places, and preferably one away from your house. More than one location, just in case. And if you take the time and digitize a really good high quality, you can do a real high quality display print that is really nice and have the chance to maybe perhaps blow up a little larger size than the original. I know some of the original photographs you may have were from a time period where before there was photo enlargement. So it's basically a contact print. from the size negative of the time. So with a high quality digitized image, you might be able to increase that size of that and kind of blow it up without losing some quality. And just simply, you create it to share. Share it with other family members, friends. That's worthy. And just keep in mind the locks system. Lots of copies keeps it safe. Some of the basics. Like I said, we're not going to go too much down the rabbit hole on this, but like I said here, digitization enables the conversion of a physical paper document or photograph or negative into a digital domain. So that would be something that you more readily share. So if you're researching or sharing with family and friends, you can email a copy or you can upload to a social media post, a Google Doc or Google Drive project. You're working with another family member across the country. You don't have to be in the physical place and send the originals back and forth and run the risk of them becoming lost or damaged. So that really protects the fragile items. Some of the simple process is just, I know it really makes people nervous, is the kind of scanner. So you're going to develop a plan. What are you going to do? What do you want to do with it? And then scanning equipment's probably almost the least of the concern. If you know what you're wanting to do, that helps you pick out the equipment, and it's fairly straightforward. And I know people get really nervous at both the scanning equipment and the software, and there's really no need. Here at the library, we have access to, or the public has access to, a number of items. We have flatbed scanners. We even have a large book scanner, which, oh man, the dimensions escape me at the moment. Something like 18 by 22 or 18 by 24 or something like that, for a large size scrapbook, or if you have a larger poster, drawings or something like that. And if you happen to have a microfilm or a microfiche, some documents that you may have gotten, a family member's service record. Well, they don't necessarily photocopy and provide photocopies of all that material to servicemen. They'll provide it on a microfiche sheet of the copies. A lot of times, they'll just copy those copies. That's how they archive them. They archive them on microfiche, so they just make a duplicate and send that. And we have microfiche reading machines, so you can scan that as well. So we got lots of good resources. So develop a plan that helps guide your scanning equipment, software, and then your storing of your digital images. And we talk about each of these points real quickly, hopefully without making anybody too nervous. This is doable, y'all. This is real doable. And we, like I said, we have a more detailed digitization class. I'm drawing a blank. I think it's coming up, but we have recorded in the past, and those are in our playlist, of our program playlist.
Yeah, it should be like March 5th or something.
Thank you. No, not March 5th. It was it is in March 15th. There you go.
Yep.
Thank you.
Digitization.
Thank you. So that's available, and we go a little bit more in the rabbit hole with this, but just establish your workflow, and that's real simple. It helps formulate your process and your project, and as you're going through, like we were talking about to begin with, you're digging out all the material that you have stored all over the place, especially attic and garage. Get them out of the attic and garage. So it's kind of like a thought process. You're collecting all your documents, all your photographs, all your letters, scrapbooks. You got part of that project done. You're organizing those. You might as well go in and digitize them. So this is kind of a simple, it doesn't, whatever works for you. This is just a quick example of you've collecting your documents. It's just showing you the workflow. And it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, different processes. You may have different processes or different tasks to do and think about, and a chart can look different, but real simple, not hard. Organize your collection, figure out your naming convention, and we'll talk about that on the next one of the next slides. Creating your folders, you actually do your scanning and tweaking of the images a little, and then you save them, simply save them to the designated folder electronically, and then you make extra copies, you back it up. Pretty straightforward. So when I say setting up a file system and creating a naming convention, and with this basic example, you just have your master folder. Let's just say these are your high resolution images. And you've created a folder for a 1984 graduation, a 1984 family reunion, and a 1985 Texas vacation. So over on the right-hand side within that folder, the 1984 graduation folder, you have your images. So these happen to be TIFF file. Like I said, these are going to be your high resolution archived images. And you just have your naming. It's a graduation ceremony. So there's image 1, image 2, image 3. Then the dinner. You just have the images of just whatever naming convention works for you so that you can identify readily without A, going in too much information, or B, having too little and getting them all mixed up and all confused in your folders. That's the main thing. Simple enough. Descriptive name files, just to help you identify the names and identify the files in the organization. Now, I mentioned the types of material. These are some of the items to keep in mind that when you're looking to plan, I guess I should have said, your digitization, the type of material, the color, space, the resolution, and the file format. Nothing really hard. Type of material simply, is it your ancestral chart or a paper ephemera, a letter? Is it a photograph or is it a negative? Great, that's easy enough to identify because the workflow is going to be different. What you're going to do or how you're going to scan stuff varies slightly. So by organizing and keeping the like materials together, you don't have to keep resetting the scanner or adjusting the scanner settings. If you're all doing photographs, prints, you scan all your photograph prints with basically the same settings. It depends, some variations. Not to get everybody freaked out, but to remember though, stay true to the original. Be sure you crop properly. And what I mean by that is you create a margin around the image that's not too close or not too wide next to the photograph or the letter. You may want to only use a portion of maybe a letter because it's just blank page maybe at the bottom, and you're just, a lot of times people will just say, oh, it's just one little paragraph at the top and the bottom half of the page is empty. I'll just scan this top part. Don't do it. Scan the whole thing and include a little bit of boundary. Like as example here, we have this photograph and you can see you got round corners. So we scanned all the way around. So by looking at that, all the information that's possible to see on this document is there. If you just zeroed in on that half a page, that top portion of the page, you or somebody in your family is going to be wondering to eternity, especially if they don't have the original, was there anything else on that page? If you scan the whole page, even though the lower half is blank, you know for a fact they only did the top part of the page. Yeah, so that's, you know, moderate adjustment on the correction for tonal values, and, you know, making sure it's not too light or too dark. You know, some of the contrast, those are easily done with some basic scanning, basic level scanners even, so they can do a high quality scan. So really quick, material type, just as I said, photographs, you've got color slides, the positives, if you will. Color photograph, an example of color negative. In the color space, what we're just simply talking about is it black and white, bitonal? That's the printed text in a book, mind you. That's a good example of that. Grayscale, that could be a black and white photograph. You really have shades of gray. It's not just black and white. You've got shades of gray in there that you want to capture that information. It can be handwritten text or black and white illustration. In my experience, I would almost do, depending on depending on the paper and the handwriting, sometimes it might be best to do the handwritten text in color than just simply grayscale. Sometimes it picks up the variation of the weight of the handwriting a little slightly better, in a more of a faithful reproduction. And then, you know, the RGB, that's simply the color photographs, color illustrations. And I have some examples. Bitonal, there's the printed text or typewritten text. The grayscale, you've got a black and white negative, that's in grayscale. You've got a couple of different prints, or a printed matter, but because it has an illustration in it that has variations in shades of gray, you've done grayscale to that printed material. And color. In fact, here you can see, here is a handwritten that was scanned in color. The resolution is pretty simple as well. The more pixels, the higher the resolution. So you might see it listed depending on the scanner you're using. You might see it, or you might have heard of this, the DPI, or dots per inch, or the PPI, the pixels per inch. Either way, they're talking about the tiny little dots that make up the image. And the more dots per inch, the finer the image, and also the larger the file. So in this example, here's 72 dots per inch. You can kind of see that picture is kind of grainy, kind of pixelated. But at 600 PPI, pixels per inch, it's a lot more faithful reproduction. And a lot of time the scanner control, as the example here, will have a drop-down list, so you can change that dots per inch or the PPI, depending. And here's another example, a little close. Especially if you're, like I mentioned earlier, you may have a print. There was a contact print because it was a smaller print from earlier time. If you scan that in a good high resolution, you'll be able to enlarge it. So the higher the resolution, or the larger the number of pixels per inch, the PPI or the DPI, the larger you'll be able to, or the greater you'll be able to enlarge that photo, and hopefully display that, or be able to enlarge it to see some information that you didn't formerly see before, that, oh, they're actually holding a puppy, or something that you didn't make out in the smaller original print quite so clearly. Or they might see, like kind of like in this example, might see that they're wearing a brooch that in that image that happens to be the one that was your great grandmother's brooch that you actually have now. And now you have it, you can actually pick it out and see it in the enlarged photo that you couldn't before. Those are neat things. And like I was talking about earlier, the format resolution. High resolution file is going to be, your larger the number, the 400 to 600 pixels per inch, the PPI. And the formats that are the high resolution and the archival files are the TIFFs, the PNGs. Simply just in a thumbnail, those are files that they're a lossless compression. They don't lose information every time you open and close. Yeah, you ever photocopied something and you photocopied a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and each succeeding generation it gets more unlegible and grosser as you get through the copies? Well, the more you open the lower resolution files, the JPEGs, as a good example, in order to compress those files and make them smaller, the software jettisons some information. So every time you open and close and open and close and open and close, you lose some digital information. That's really kind of the basic crude explanation for that. And the TIFFs and the PNGs don't use that same type of process, so they don't lose as much information. Hence, they're considered the high resolution and the archival format. Did I succeed in losing everybody on that one? And just in case you want to do a deep dive at this point, and I said, like we said, we're doing the digitization class on March 15th. We're talking about this in a little bit more detail, well, a good bit more detail. But here's some good best practices for the digitization, some scanning standards. These are quite large documents, but they're pretty self-explanatory and pretty informative documents, both from the University of North Texas and also some preservation tips available from the Texas State Library. Some really helpful tips. So, are there any questions? I see something popped up there.
No new questions. Yep.
Okay. Well, I appreciate y'all attending tonight. Thank you for that. Hope I answered some of y'all's burning, yearning questions, or maybe I presented many more questions. Well, that's good, because we're willing to help and find out. If you have any questions you think of after the fact, feel free to contact us at genealogy@plano.gov. That's
We had a quick request if you could put the last slide back up.
Oh,
Someone
certainly.
wants to write down some information.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. Yeah, they're kind of long URLs. I should have left that up longer. Sorry about that.
Will these slides be available after the fact?
They're up now from a previous recorded, not in this format of a slide deck like this, but the previously recorded, and this recording will be up on our YouTube Genealogy Center playlist on the Plano Public Library's YouTube channel. We have a genealogy class playlist. And in fact, that's also on our website too. I think there's a link for that as well.
Yep.
Yeah, Nathan, did you already pop that link up?
I put the PPL YouTube Genealogy Center playlist in the chat.
Yeah.
We have a couple other questions. What is the best way to save details about photos that are attached to the photo?
Oh, good question. I forgot to mention that. Like I said, I was doing a light version of the digitization thing. We go into much more, kind of like on the same, what I was talking about of being faithful in capturing, going off just off the edge of the thing. Do front and back. Even if there's nothing there of a photo, let's say, do both sides, because that way too, you have the complete of the face of it, and then you can see, was there anything written on the back? Was this who was in the middle of this photo? And you flip it over and like, oh, they named the person on the left and the right, but they didn't know capture that information. And then too, if there's nothing there, you also know there was nothing else to be gleaned from that resource. Even if it doesn't have something handwritten, let's say identifying anybody in the photograph, sometimes the older photos, if it was done at a photo studio, there might be a stamp telling you where, maybe their address, some olden information that might be of interest to kind of track down that, oh, that studio closed in 1925. And then they moved to a different street or a different city or something. That's all good information. So yeah, good question. Good question. Yeah, and being faithful to capture the whole end of it. If there's like doodle notes in the margin, sometime. Oh, and another good point too. Because you're digitizing and you're scanning, and you can kind of play with some of the colors and the contrast. Sometimes there may be some components that are not really legible, that you can tell for, my vision can't see some things, but if you were to enhance that with the contrast, you could tweak it a little bit, and it might yield some other information of something lightly scribbled in pencil that you hadn't really noticed before, because the page itself was rather yellowed or something. So has all kinds of potentials to discover other information things. But yeah, front and back. That's a very good question. I forgot. Thank you for reminding.
We have a somewhat technical question. Is there a way to save the chat?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if
I don't feel like there is a way to do that, but
yeah, I don't know if the chat gets captured when we're streaming like this.
Yeah, just save the links that get posted in a bookmark or somewhere, and
yeah,
that's useful.
Yeah, go through. I think you might be able to. I think the attendees might somewhere on the chat have a way to an option to save the chat. So it gets to the end, we'll pause before we just kill it.
Yep, I found the way there. There's the three dots above the type message here area on the right side. If you click on that, there is a save chat button.
There we go. And also, I did take a moment to please, y'all, when you close out and leave, there should be a pop-up survey when you exit the class tonight. So please, we thank you. Take a few moments and complete that post-class survey for us. That your feedback and information is very helpful for us.
Trey, we do also have a question in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
It's save as JPEG, TIFF, PNG, or PSE Photoshop.
As in, yeah, the PSE Photoshop. My suggestion, I know depending on if you're using I borrowed a friend's Nikon camera, and it's saved to the to the disk, the storage media, and a proprietary. You really were locked down to this model of camera. You were, I think it was a Nikon. You were held to a certain proprietary format. I would avoid proprietary formats. JPEG, the PNG, the TIFFs are international standards. Anything where you're beholding now to a version of Photoshop or whatever kind of format by the software, keep in mind that might not be available in 6 months. Next year, and then your computer may die, and then you don't have that access to that software anymore. So I would stay away from any kind of proprietary format that locks you into using it on X software. I would keep it as open and international standard as possible, because you don't want to lose all your access to all the work that you went through to scan everything. That would be frustrating. Again, we thank you, and hopefully if you're interested, join us on March 15th, and we'll go in a little bit more detail on digitization projects. It's nothing to be scary, nothing to be scared of. It just takes some time. Anybody can do it. All right. If there's no other new questions, I appreciate it. We will be ending shortly.